Welcome to the next video. In this video, we'll be creating on the side of the bulldozer and below the cabin the covers for the track. As you can see on this reference picture, there's quite a few details attached to it, and we need to create this first before we can start on the cabin as a sort of base to work on. I'm just going to start off with a simple box shape as a starting primitive, and I want it to sit flush next to the hood of the bulldozer, so I've enabled that again. Then just moving it, and I'm comparing to my block out to see how big exactly this should stick out to the side. Once that's done, I'm just going to start doing some simple poly modeling to get the shapes in the correct position. This really isn't anything difficult. It's almost the same as the block out, but this time around we're just doing it really exact and really correct. After that, I select the sides. And why have I selected the sides and duplicated them? Well, since this part is made up out of a lot of metal plating, I want to build it up the same way in my detailed high poly. So I'm just selecting this part and extending the edges slightly so that I can get it to look exactly like metal plating. Then I'm duplicating the inside, and once that inside is duplicated, I'm moving it and I'm going to attach it to this part so that I actually have a thickness on that metal plating on the outside. With that done, I'm just using the Swift loop again to quickly add a few subdivisions. There we go. Adding these around. And after that's done, we're going to go to a little detail here at the front. There is a sort of detail that looks like the plate is bent around the front there. And I've created that by just simply extruding. And once it's extruded, I'm adding the extra edges that will support the geometry. Now I'm adding these later in because if I would have done these beforehand, it would have been more work and more difficult to extrude that. And mostly on the back side because as it currently sits, the back of the bulldozer is actually, the back of these track covers is actually open. There's an opening in there, and inside that opening, the actual rear lights, tail lights of the bulldozer sit. So what I'm doing here is I'm just simply adding some geometry so that I can model this in. And I'm just extruding that inwards, then moving it up so that it doesn't intersect with the other geometry. That done. There's also a metal plate on the top of this detail part. So I'm doing the same trick here, selecting the polygons, shift moving them to duplicate them, and then performing an extrude. Again, on a few parts of these, there's like an extruded part that bends over the side. So that's simply what I'm doing here. I'm using an extrude. A few rotates, a little bit of scaling too, makes it easier to work with to create that bent over look. That done, I'm adding a few final parts and a last extrude to get the supporting edges in there. After that, I'm simply using the Swift Loop tool again to add the final supporting edges. This is all pretty simple. Just gotta make sure you do things in the right order. And one interesting thing I'm doing here is I'm just moving a few of the verts around so that it doesn't look too perfect, too tight, and too clean. If I look on the reference pictures, a lot of these plates just have a few slightly bent. They're not mounted exactly in the best way possible. So I'm just adding a few of these details on there. There we go, and add some at the bottom. There's an amazing amount of supporting geometry you have to add most of the time. So it helps to use a tool that allows you to do this as quickly as possible, and that tool will be Swift Loop. Adding a few more here. Why? Because I want some subdivisions in there. So I have those selected. I want to move them down a little bit more. Just be a little bit longer at the bottom there. And there's my basic shape, so I'm just going to change the color now. There's quite a few details attached, so I want to create those as well. We're going to start off with the old favorite, just using the old the nut model that I've used so many times before. Same trick all over, just duplicating it, attaching it, whatever. You've seen this before. The same trick to make it easier to put it on sloped surfaces. Just create a cylinder with auto grid first, and that way you can get it nicely aligned to your surface. A few random rotations. I think this is important to not make it look too fake. Right. I'm going to do another duplicate. And right now I just spotted that on these handles, these bars at the front, there should also be some a nut to fasten them onto the hood of the bulldozer. So I'm just quickly creating this. I know I'm jumping to another part here, but if you see a detail that isn't right, just jump to it, fix it. Don't postpone that sort of stuff. And another reason I'm doing that is because I want to use the same handles on the side of the track covers. I'm just going to modify them slightly. They're not as high, and their shape is slightly different. Right, so the plate that's bent over the side is also fastened with a few nuts. So I'm just going to duplicate these nuts here. Always, when I duplicate them multiple times, always use more than I'm sure that it will need. Reason for that is you can just delete the extra ones, while it's harder to get the new ones in there with the same spacing. Here we go, another extra part. And what this part is for, this wasn't very clear on the reference, so I'm just almost making this up myself. It's a sort of support part that holds up the track covers. The track covers, well, they need to be attached to the side in some way, so I'm creating this L-shaped sort of profile. And this L-shaped profile, it simply holds up the track covers on the side. So I'm just trying to make this shape slightly interesting. Nothing too special. It's an inset. And delete these. The reason I'm deleting those is I don't want to get that rounded shape in there. Move these in like that. And then performing an extrude, well, actually multiple extrudes. And then just using my Swift loop to add the extra supporting geometry. I'm adding a few subdivisions here so that the Turbo Smooth doesn't have a problem with the low subdivision of these surfaces. So performing a slight few adjustments to get this shape more interesting. Scaling it down slightly, moving it up. Makes it more interesting than just straight on straight. And as a final detail, I'm just going to add this small box shape on the inside, delete the back, move it in a little bit, and then just add a few subdivisions. Move these out, and then perform an extrude of 0 and move these manually. There we go. And then just use my Swift loop to add the final detail to these shapes. There we go, delete the top. With that done, you can just go back to the main shape and select and attach that part. Okay, there we go. So that's our little detail made there. Now we also have to create a detail at the front, and I'm starting with a spline here. I've drawn this sort of incomplete rectangle, and I'm slightly adjusting the thickness and the width so that I can get the right shape out of this. And you could do this with box modeling, sure. I'm just using spline here because it's quicker in this case for me. You just simply select these top points and then go down to the fillet button and then just manually round off these corners. I think it's just easier. There we go. Change a few of these settings. That should be about right. Into an editable poly, then add a few subdivisions to edit these about. There we go. Gotta remember when you create a spline, there's always a triangulated polygon on one side, and you gotta get rid of that. It's kind of annoying, but I don't think there's a setting to turn this off. Not that I've noticed in the past 4 years. So there we are. Add a few subdivisions, and the reason for this is this has a specific reason. There are some holes in the side of this part. There's actually 2 times 2 holes, and we're just gonna create these with the subdivided version. Once I've attached that, there you go, you can see those holes at the side. Now this cover, what this does is it protects one of the lights on the bulldozer from, I guess, from rain. So I'm gonna model the light that's in there. This is a pretty simple shape. It's just a box rounded with a few bevels and insets. I'm using chamfer to add rounding to the box. Then just select these manually, these vertices, and then just connect them. That way we don't have any n-gons, which is better for our subdivision modeling. TurboSmooth doesn't have any problems with that. Now I'm just roughly adding in a few shapes. As I said, there are a few insets here and there. And this part's actually extruded for this nicely beveled edge around. And then at the front here, we want to give the actual lens part of the light an interesting shape also. So all I'm doing here is, this is really simple stuff. I'm just combining insets and scaling. Now, there are some slight problems when I'm insetting this shape too much. So I'm just using scale tool to fix that. There we go, that looks better. Once that's done, I can just attach it. There we are. With that attached, it's time to move on to the next detailed shape, and there's like a sort of protective guard around the front. And this one's it's also a good idea to start from the spline here. Make it a little bit less thick. And add some fillets to the corners. There we go, that looks about right. Move these in slightly. And reduce the interpolation. And of course, the number of sides. You shouldn't have too many when you convert from a spline to a polygon. And I'm just flattening these parts out to reflect their shape in real life. I mean, these are bent metal bars, and the ends are sort of squished, which makes it easier to attach them, and I think also more solid to attach them to the main part of the bulldozer. With that done, I'm going to scale these up also. It reflects the squishing of the real part. And of course, I can't forget to add my supporting edges at both ends. There we are. And I think you could do with being a little bit thicker. It seems a little bit thin. Well, there's an easy way. Just add a push modifier and collapse it down, and there you go. Looks a whole lot thicker and a lot more sturdy. That done, I'm just taking this nut and adding it to the same model over here as I did with the other one. I'm going to scale it down slightly. And there's actually 2. Gotta make sure not to attach the wrong part. Okay, so next up, another detail. This one might look complicated, but it's also built up out of a ton of simpler shapes. I'm just gonna start with a box here. It's this sort of hinged lock type of thing. There's a hook with a little part that you move over it, and that way this, I think it's some sort of storage box probably, is closed off. So simple modeling. performing an inset here so that the top gets nicely rounded. Then performing an extrude at the bottom. And just scaling those things down nicely. And you can see it's a small hinge part. So there we go. Using the grow selection to move it around slightly. Move that up slightly. There we go. Then we get that sort of bent look. And attaching it together. One thing I also want to fix is at the side here, I've added some armor plating, but because the reference isn't very clear here, I didn't continue yet. But now that I'm creating these track covers, I'm just going to continue the armor plating on the side of the bulldozer. So I'm just simply moving out this part, making sure everything's covered. I'm not going to put too much effort in this because you won't see a lot, but it's still got to stay believable. So that's what we're doing here. Pretty simple in terms of shape. Just got to make sure it encompasses the entire area. And I actually deleted that part there. Why did I do that? Well, I don't really feel like modeling something too complex that fits around the extrusion for the drive sprocket. So I'm just going to make the armor plating stop there. I figure that area is pretty solid in real life anyway, so it doesn't need that much extra armor. And I'm just going to move some of these weld seams around, add a little bit of extra detail. Make sure they go all the way until the edge, that they don't stick out. Use the move dialog to move them in slightly more. Okay, with that done, I'm going to work a little bit more on the armor. I've hidden some parts. And with those parts hidden, I can just perform these extrusions. And they allow me to close up the sides of this mesh to make it look like a real thick armored plate. There we go. It's very simple in terms of shape, but nobody will probably ever see that, so there's no reason we put more work in that. So some slight tweaking here. I actually noticed that on the reference, the side of this, I call it the triangular part at the hood of the bulldozer, almost meets the top of the track covers that we're modeling right now. So I got to move that around. This is something that you could say should have been done in the blockout, but that means you got to add more detail in your blockout, which means you lose more time with it than you would eventually lose fixing this here. So I'm just fixing it right away. Anyway, it's not a big problem. Just moving it around slightly. No big deal. There we are. I'm just moving around all the details. Got to make sure that everything covers and that the details are showing.